Not too long ago, Tyron Woodley was an unavoidable name within the MMA community. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more divisive championship reign than the 5-fight streak that saw Woodley single himself out as one of the greatest welterweights to ever lace up gloves. That string of victories that saw the Chosen One defeat Robbie Lawler, Thompson, Demian Maia and Darren Till is a streak that will no doubt age well in the history books. But here we are, 3 fights later, 14 rounds removed from his UFC 228 victory over Darren Till, and Tyron now finds himself in the unenviable position of having clearly lost every single one of those rounds. A 3-fight skid is one thing, but the manner in which Woodley was so easily dealt with really stood as a cause for concern among his fans. I think it's safe to say that Woodley held a strange position within the sport during his prime years. Personally, I was a big fan of that methodical, technical approach, while admiring how he managed to deal with a pair of the trickiest specialists the sports has ever known in Demian Maia and Thompson. And for me, while it was understandable that the fans were growing impatient with Woodley during that 3-fight stretch, I never held it against the champ that he fought the way that he did. Both Wonderboy and Maia were on exceptional streaks at the time, each proving themselves to be among the most uniquely effective fighters of their era. Both utilized singularly minded approaches, Thompson with the striking, Maia with his grappling. Woodley at the time was able to do what no one else could do. He fought his fight against a duo that had found huge success in forcing their opponents to play their game. During Wonderboy's initial rise, who was actually able to stop his game, able to contend with his perfect adaptation of that karate style for MMA? Maia, as we know, was a veteran by the time he actually made his climb through the welterweight ranks, but even still, it was on that run that we actually saw him perfect his approach. No longer was he attempting to be the striker, he had found a singular focus and a path to victory that saw him defeat all comers. Woodley deserves the utmost credit for taking on and defeating these two challengers over the course of 3 different fights. Sure, it wasn't always the most riveting contest, but in terms of the heights that he reached in terms of technique and overall game planning, I believe that the 5-fight streak that started with his KO of Robbie Lawler and ended with his destruction of Darren Till is deserving of huge praise. So when you look at Woodley in the time since, it's easy to speculate over what exactly has gone wrong. To say that he has looked flat is an understatement. Indeed, he has been facing the very best of the best in Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns and Colby Covington, but I suppose the main question here is one that revolves around what we actually saw from Tyron in those bouts. Because let's be real, he did look as though he just couldn't find that fire within him anymore. I don't want to dip into speculation to an unnecessary degree here, but Woodley didn't offer up any danger to any of those fighters at all. That's 14 rounds of fighting. Obviously at 38 years old, time is not on his side, but for me, it truly was a worrying sight. Should the excellence of the fighters who beat him be factored in? Of course. Stylistically speaking, all 3 were in many ways perfect foils to Tyron's style, but even still, the general consensus seems to be that somewhere along the way Woodley fell off in dramatic fashion. It is difficult to speculate over the exact reasons behind this sudden dip into timidity, but perhaps there is something to be said for the onset of age and its effects on Tyron's already hesitant kind of style. His entire game is built on this strange combination of extremely measured offense and impeccable defense. He didn't take too much in the way of damage during his heyday, save for his fight with Nate Marquardt. And given his ridiculous athleticism, he was able to explode without warning, dealing huge power out to his adversary. A lot of that game and his approach came as a result of Woodley's well-documented stamina issues in his earlier career. But the fighting style that was born out of it was one that was surprisingly effective while it lasted. If you ask me, I do believe that Woodley's issues can be divided between issues of the mental and the physical. Both often tie into each other, perhaps to an even greater extent than we care to admit. And after being thoroughly dominated and beat down by the still reigning champion of the welterweight division, Kamaru Usman, at UFC 235, perhaps the shortcomings of Tyron's style were made abundantly clear to him. After a 15-month layoff, Woodley would return to fight twice in the space of about 4 months, and by the looks of those defeats, it did seem like he was something of a changed fighter, perhaps more mentally than in his overall approach, which more or less stayed the same. So what does he do now? If he does want to find his way back into the title picture that he has now certainly been shut out of, there are a few options that would indeed work. But given his dip in form and his current ranking, I don't want to see him fighting an elite test. If retaining some degree of the success he had before is the goal, getting back into that win column is paramount, and for a lack of a better way of saying it, Tyron Woodley absolutely needs a tune-up fight. That doesn't necessarily mean an unranked fighter, but after a 3-fight skid to number 1, number 2 and number 3, keeping Woodley's name away from the top 6 or 7 would be wise, but who knows how it will play out. At this point, Tyron hasn't expressed much of an interest in retirement, so perhaps we will see him make the walk again. But if he does in fact decide to hang up his gloves and call it a day, in my opinion, he will leave behind a legacy that places him as the second greatest welterweight of all time. I realise that he has indeed been divisive, but you just can't overlook the impressive nature of his resume. Even with some of his pre-title reign wins in mind, Woodley has managed to dissect and defeat some of the most revered fighters of his era. Sure, the 3-fight streak of dominant losses does not look good at all, but a glance over the careers of his competition to second place, the likes of Robbie Lawler, Matt Hughes and so on, that will be enough to tell you that a decline is something to at least be expecting. Simply put, Woodley's championship reign was a memorable one. He overcame several hugely difficult tasks, and with 4 successful defenses of that belt, he has the longevity to warrant such praise. If his time in the top flight is truly at its end, then perhaps a fun, winnable fight would suffice to give us a better understanding of where exactly it is that he stands within the overall 170-pound picture. Either way, we will likely learn a lot about the future of the Chosen One before too long, and I, for one, am quite interested to see what happens. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. And as always, thank you for watching.